Chapter 14 of The Finding of Jasper Holt by Grace Livingston Hill. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 14 Jean turned white with deadly sickening fear, but kept her head courageously up. She whipped up her pony and tried to get away, but the strong hand held the bridle, and the little beast could only rear, almost throwing her. Moreover, a gleaming pistol shone into Jean's terrified eyes, and Scathlin in gloating voice spoke low. "Oh no, my pretty, you don't come any of your little tricks on me. You've stole a paper I give you to give to your brother, and I mean to have it without any further nonsense. Hand it over." And he grasped her roughly by the arm. "Help! Mr. Holt! Jasper!" she screamed. Something was stuffed into her mouth, and the barrel of the pistol gleamed between her eyes. She could feel the cold steel against her flesh. The earth seemed reeling beneath her, and her senses were going from her. Was there no hope of help from anywhere? "Now, my pretty, I'll just help myself to that paper." Scathlin's voice was malevolent, his eyes gleaming. Like the cold slimy length of a serpent coiling around her soul, the meaning of his words slid about her consciousness. She felt she was sinking out of the world of knowledge into a blackness where she could not protect herself. Then quickly, sharply, a voice brought her back to consciousness. "Drop that pistol. Let go of that lady. Now, march." It was Holt's voice, low, merciless, commanding, and a revolver was in his hand. Scathlin fell away like water, turning deadly white and cringing. The day of his judgment had come swiftly, and there was no escape. He knew that look in Holt's eye. He had sinned away his last probation. Holt would never trust him again. There was not even time to destroy the letter which he had wanted to keep and give to Harrington as evidence against the girl. "March," said Holt's voice again, and the revolver came uncomfortably near to Scathlin's temple. Scathlin marched. "Go straight to the house and wait there till I come," commanded Holt as Scathlin backed weakly away. "If you attempt to escape, I'll turn the bloodhounds loose after you." Scathlin turned a shade paler. He had had experience with one of those bloodhounds. He had no desire to meet the whole pack. He hastened his footsteps. Jean sat with wild eyes, watching, her hand upon her heart. "You didn't send him for the paper, did you?" she demanded eagerly. "I knew you would never have sent him." "Send for the paper? What paper?" asked Holt in wonder. "I never sent him for anything." "Then how did he know what was in my letter to you?" "Letter? What letter? I never received a letter from you." "Then he must have opened it and read it. Oh, he will show it to my brother." But Holt's voice rang out clearly before her sentence was fairly finished. "Halt! Scathlin!" Scathlin had almost reached the turning at the edge of the woods, but he paused instantly. "Come back here." Scathlin came, cringing and white with fear. When he was within 10 yards of the two, Holt spoke again, and all the time the sinister weapon kept guard in his hand, aimed straight at Scathlin. "Give me my letter." "What letter?" chattered Scathlin with ill-concealed attempt to use his cunning. "The letter you have in your pocket. Take it out instantly and drop it on the ground, or I shall fire," said Holt sternly. "Well, put down that gun," whimpered Scathlin, fumbling nervously in his inside pocket. "You make me nervous." "Be quick. Drop that letter," said Holt, still holding the revolver. Scathlin took out the letter and dropped it on the ground, but his bad little eyes gleamed green and yellow hate at the girl in one look of wrath as he turned and stumbled back again. Holt, still holding the revolver and watching the retreating man, advanced and picked up the letter. When Scathlin was out of sight he read it, then turned with softened eyes to the girl, who had meantime secured the paper from its hiding place pinned within her blouse. She held it out to him, her hand still trembling with the fright that she had been through. Holt took the paper, but gathered the little hand into his tenderly, and, stooping, kissed it. "To think you have been through all this for me!" There was awe in his voice. "To think you trusted me instead of your own people!" For an instant they looked into each other's eyes. Then Holt's horse, trained to stand and await his master's will, whinnied softly. "We must not stand here," said Holt, looking up sharply. "Someone might come. I will take you on to Mrs. Foster's, and then go back and see that Scathlin is where he can do no further harm. How long will you wish to be there? Can you stay an hour and then ride back? I will be waiting just in the shadow of the woods to see you to the edge of town, where you will be safe. Please don't ride out of town alone again." "But I shall not be afraid to go back," protested Jean. "You need not take all that trouble. Now that you have the paper I shall not be afraid." "Trouble!" said Holt, looking at her with eyes that adored. "You know it is no trouble. But what is this paper that has made so much disturbance?" He had mounted his horse and was riding by her side now. He unfolded the paper, but it needed only a glance to show him what it was. "How did you happen to have it?" he asked, looking at her startled. "Have you the others?" "No," she said, a cloud of trouble coming into her eyes. "I had them, I suppose, but I did not know they were yours. I had the wallet with them in. That man gave them to me on the train before the wreck. You picked the wallet up once when it fell, don't you remember? Didn't you know they were yours?" "Yes," said Holt. "I knew. At least, I supposed I knew." "Why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't want to mix you up in the trouble," he said, looking at her tenderly. "And besides, I knew they were safe in your possession for the present." "But they weren't. I didn't know they were yours, and I gave them to my brother." "I knew you would, of course. But I was pretty sure I could stop any harm he would do before he could do it. The only thing I was troubled about was this paper. I didn't think Scathlin was fool enough to leave all the papers in the wallet. I was pretty sure he had kept this and one other himself, and only sent the rest back to throw me off the track and make me think he had sent all of them. He knew I saw him give you the wallet, and he meant I should see. He thought I would stop watching him and give my attention to you, but I knew Scathlin better than that. I kept my eye on him." "But how did you happen to have this one paper?" "I'm not sure. When I came back to my room, after giving my brother the wallet, I found this on my floor. It may have fallen when I dumped the things out of my bag. The wallet fell apart and all the papers went out on the table, but I thought I picked up every one. Then when I came back to my room I found this on the floor just as I was about to turn out the light. Later I overheard a conversation in which this paper and another were described as missing. The other was something to do with a mine." "Yes, I have it," said Holt. "You have it? Oh, I am so glad. Then they can't trouble your claim, can they? I suppose that was what they meant. I'm not very much of a business person. But how did you get it? They said it was in the wallet." "It was," said Holt, "till Scathlin took it out. I think he intended taking this also and leaving with you only the other papers which were utterly valueless without these two. But he had to work quickly while I was at the other end of the car, and he blundered. I got it out of Scathlin's shoe just after the accident occurred, and before I left the car we were in. We had a struggle in the dark, but I secured my paper before he flung me off and crawled out of the window. After that I lost sight of him. I was hunting for him in the water when I found you. I didn't know who you were till I drew you up on the bank. But I never dreamed you had this paper. I thought of course it was still with Scathlin. That's why I was away so long, hunting him. I didn't know once but I'd lost him completely, but I finally got on his track. I was sure he knew where this paper was, and I didn't dare to lose him. I brought him home to watch him, and I've kept him in sight all day today. He thought I was away from home for 2 days, but I've been in hiding. I had him watched when he went to town, and I knew he came home. If he had had this paper he would have gone straight to your brother. A field glass and a whistle will do a good deal to keep track of a man. When he stole out of the house toward the woods, I knew something was happening and signaled my men. They are waiting now. They'll look after Scathlin till I get back." He raised a tiny whistle to his lips and blew a long, silvery blast, followed by 2 more, and in a moment there came back 2 answers from slightly different directions. They were come now to the open road, and Holt drew his horse to one side. Mrs. Foster's home was but a stone's throw away, and she was sitting on the porch in her reclining chair. "I will be here when you are ready to go home," said Holt, looking at her tenderly. Then, touching his hat, he wheeled his horse and was out of sight in a twinkling. The next hour was always a blur in the memory of Jean. Somehow she drew her senses together and dismounted at her friend's door, going through the formalities of meeting and adjusting herself to the occasion. But not for an instant did her subconsciousness cease to rehearse the events just past. Her whole body quivered again with the fear that swept over her at sight of Scathlin. She shrank once more from his touch as the full realization of her escape was made known to her, and the look and voice of Holt thrilled her as nothing had ever done in her life. How could they say he was not good when he was like that? She had seen the soul of him looking out of his wonderful eyes, and she knew. But how had it come about that others had not seen also? Oh, if they knew once, if they could just get a real glimpse of the true man, they would never again feel as they did about him. She recognized fully the separation there was between them, and it brought a constriction of tears in her throat. But in her heart was a glad glow that he cared for her, and for the time it seemed enough to fill her with deep joy. She was going to see him again in a few minutes, and she could thank him for saving her life again, this time perhaps from something worse than death. She had had no words wherewith to tell him of the infinite relief his appearing had brought. Everything had happened so quickly. But it seemed as if a lifetime would be too brief to voice her gratitude for her deliverance. She shivered as she remembered the look on Scathlin's face when he took hold of her. Mrs. Foster said, "Why, you're not cold, are you, dearie, this warm day? I believe they are letting you do too much, with all their parties and things. You look white. You'd better come down and stay with me a week and get rested up." But Jean's laugh rang silverly. "Oh, no, I'm not cold, Mrs. Foster. I'm just glad over something. It's very nice of you to ask me to visit you, and I would be delighted, but you know I'm going home next week, and I'm afraid Eleanor wouldn't want to spare me when the time is so short." "Going home next week!" exclaimed the old lady in dismay. "Why, I thought you were going to stay till Christmas." "So I was, but father has to go to New York to a convention. He's been made a delegate, and it's a splendid thing for him. He hasn't had an outing in a long time. He needs it. And we couldn't leave mother alone, you know. Mother is an invalid. So of course I'm going home a little sooner. But I've had a beautiful time here, and maybe I can come again sometime." All the time that Jean was talking, her real self was thinking how wonderful it had been that it was Holt who saved her again, and not just some passing stranger. The hour was over at last, and Jean joyously mounted her pony and bade her friend good-bye. But when she rode into the shadow of the woods and saw Holt on his shining black horse waiting quietly beside the road for her, a great shyness overcame her, and she knew she would never be able to put into words the great thoughts of her heart, and that perhaps it was as well, for he would understand, and words were not necessary for them. There could not be much said without saying too much. After all, they said very little. The way was short till they came to the edge of town, though they walked their horses as slowly as possible. But there were looks and glances of the soul, trustful, grateful, worshipful, and each felt the blessedness of these few minutes alone together. Holt told her briefly of Scathlin. He was safe? She need fear him no more. He would not be abroad to trouble her during the rest of her stay. His eyes more than his words informed her how he regretted the brevity of that stay. His eyes told her also that Scathlin's judgment would be tempered with mercy and righteousness. There was one question she wished to ask him. She hesitated long, but finally risked it. "Will you enter the tournament?" she asked, lifting her eyes full of pleading that his answer should be yes. "You know about it, of course? You know they are giving me a tournament before I go home?" He bowed gravely. "Yes, I know. You will like it. It is one of the most interesting affairs they have in town. I am glad you will see it." She saw he was evading her question. "Will you enter?" she asked again, anxiously. He searched her face keenly. "You want me to?" "I do, very much," she said, and the rich color in her cheeks told him how much she wanted it. "Your friends will not like it," he said. "But the tournament is given for me, and I shall like it," she said with spirit. "I am sure you can ride." "I can ride a little," he said indifferently. "Then will you enter?" "If you really wish it." "I certainly wish it," she said gladly. Then suddenly out from the woods rode two men. Fine, tall, sturdy fellows they were, perhaps 10 or more years older than Holt, but with strong faces, keen eyes, and muscles that looked like iron. They saluted Holt as if he were their military officer, and one rode close to him and said a few words in a low tone. Holt nodded gravely, his fine, boyish face taking on maturer lines as he gave attention to the message, and uttered his brief, ready directions, utterly unintelligible to the girl who looked on in bewilderment at this new phase of the young man's character. The second rider had halted at a respectful distance, without a glance in her direction, and waited as a trained servitor should do. Devotion to Holt and absolute obedience were in the attitude of both. The interview occupied scarcely a minute. Then the two men wheeled, saluted, and rode away once more into the woods. "A little trouble at the mine," Holt explained in answer to her questioning glance. "It'll be all right now, since I have this paper again. We haven't dared to exercise our water privileges as we should, and have been moving under difficulties, but now that I have the grant there will be no further trouble. I'll take care it's put where no one can steal it again." "Oh, I'm so glad," breathed Jean. "But who are they?" pointing after the two riders, who were just disappearing behind the trees. "My men," said Holt. "I have 54 of them, fine fellows every one." "Your men?" questioned Jean in surprise. "They work for me, in the mine and around the place. I've picked them up here and there. That big fellow that waited, I took him down from a tree where they'd hung him up for stealing a horse. He's the one I told you of. I thought he was dead, but there he is. He wouldn't take a pin now that belonged to anyone else. He's the straightest fellow on the place. The other one was almost gone with fever when I met up with him. We've nursed each other twice apiece since then. There are others I'd like you to know if things weren't as they are. You'd see the good in them, I'm sure. You seem to understand." Jean's eyes were alight as she watched him. "They know you," she exclaimed. "They've seen the real you, and they trust you. I saw it in their eyes." "Maybe," he said, returning her look. "They'd fight for me any time I asked it, and they'd die for me if it came to that." "Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends." The words seemed to come of themselves from the girl's lips as she watched the man in wonder and admiration. "You took a mighty slim chance on yours for me about an hour ago." Holt's eyes spoke volumes. "Why didn't you give him the paper? It was by far the safest thing for you to do. Didn't you know that?" "Yes," said the girl, her soft lips setting in a firm line and her chin taking the tilt that gave her sweet face its strength and fineness. "But the paper was yours, and I was sure it was valuable. I didn't trust him." "And you trust me yet, in spite of all the things I know you must have heard about me?" "I trust you forever." Her eyes were clear and steady, and her voice was sweet with a ring of triumph in it as she made the declaration. For a moment they looked at one another with a great blinding light of deep gladness shining from their eyes. Then the man bowed his head gravely, and, reaching over, took her hand in a strong, quick clasp. "You shall never have cause to lose that trust," he murmured solemnly, and, turning, rode back into the woods and left her to go on alone through the town. End of chapter 14.